Ma'am, you need to leave this area right now. This is restricted.
On what authority? This is my office.
You don't belong here. Gather your things. Step outside.
You need to leave this area right now. The officer's voice cut through the hallway at 8:12 a.m., sharp and impatient, echoing off marble walls polished by decades of government footsteps. The woman looked up slowly from a stack of case files on her desk. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She simply asked a question. On what authority? The officer shifted his weight hand resting near his belt. This is a restricted office. You do not belong here. Please gather your things and step outside. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a copier spat out paper in steady rhythm, unaware that something was already going wrong. The woman closed the file folder with care. Her movements were controlled, deliberate. This is my office, she said. I have a meeting in 18 minutes. The officer glanced past her, scanning the room as if searching for proof that contradicted her presence. Framed certificates lined the wall. A small American flag stood in the corner. Family photos sat beside a thick federal statute book. None of it registered. Ma'am, don't make this difficult. I've been told to clear this office. If you don't comply, I will escort you out. His tone hardened louder now, carrying just far enough for others to hear. Two aides slowed their walk down the corridor. A paralegal paused near the water fountain, pretending to check her phone. The woman stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. She was calm, but the room felt tighter, the air heavier. She reached into her blazer pocket, not abruptly, not defensively. I am asking you again, she said, steady and clear. What is your legal basis for removing me from my own office? The officer exhaled through his nose. You were reported as unauthorized. I don't need to argue with you. Step outside, now. A phone camera clicked on somewhere behind him. Another followed. The silence was no longer empty. It was watching. For a brief moment, the woman's eyes moved across the faces gathering in the hallway. She saw recognition forming. Confusion. Unease. She turned back to the officer. I am a United States District Attorney, she said. My name is on the door you just walked past. The words landed, but they did not stop him. Not yet. He hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of the room shift. Then pride took over. Credentials can be faked, he replied. You can explain everything to my supervisor outside. The conflict was no longer private. It had crossed a line. And everyone in that hallway knew it. The hallway scene freezes in time, then the story pulls backward years before that morning, before the badge, before the accusation, long before anyone questioned whether she belonged in that office. She grew up on the south side of Chicago, the daughter of a public school teacher and a postal worker. Their apartment was small, but it was disciplined. Homework at the kitchen table, news on every night, conversations about fairness, about rules, about what happens when power goes unchecked. She learned early that authority did not always mean justice, and that silence was often the most dangerous choice. Law school was not a straight line. Scholarships covered part of it. Night shifts and clerk work covered the rest. She graduated near the top of her class while classmates with family money debated which firms felt prestigious enough. She chose prosecution. Not for status. For leverage. She believed the system could be forced to work if someone knew how to push it from the inside. As an assistant prosecutor, she handled cases others avoided. Gang violence, public corruption, civil rights violations buried under procedural excuses. She learned to read police reports for what was missing, not just what was written. She learned how authority hides behind routine language. Over 2 decades, she sent violent offenders to prison, overturned wrongful arrests, and terminated plea deals when evidence was tainted. Her name became familiar in federal courtrooms. Her reputation followed quietly, thorough, uncompromising, calm under pressure. When she was appointed United States District Attorney, it was not ceremonial. It was earned. Her office prosecuted multi-state trafficking rings, corrupt contractors, and law enforcement officials who crossed lines they thought no one would notice. She had testified before Congress. She had trained younger attorneys on constitutional boundaries. The walls of her office were not decoration. They were documentation of a career built on restraint and rule of law. Now the story shifts to the man in uniform standing in her doorway. He joined the force at 24, fresh from the academy, confident, praised early for decisiveness. Supervisors described him as assertive. He described himself as proactive. Over time, those words became shields. Complaints followed him, not enough to end his career, but enough to leave a trail. Stops that escalated too fast. Reports that lacked detail. Civilians who said his tone changed when he felt challenged. Internal reviews cleared him. Training sessions were assigned. Nothing stuck. Each incident reinforced a belief that he was being scrutinized unfairly. That hesitation was weakness. That backing down meant losing control. He learned that authority once questioned had to be defended. On that morning, he was assigned to building security after a report of an unauthorized person accessing offices. The description was vague. Female. Alone. In a space marked federal. He did not verify names on doors. He did not check access logs. He saw someone who did not match his expectation of power. In his mind, federal authority had a look. A uniform. A badge he recognized. A voice that sounded like his supervisor's. The woman at the desk did not fit the image he carried. That assumption made everything else invisible. Back in the hallway, the present catches up again. Colleagues whispered because they recognized her and because they recognized the danger of what was unfolding. One assistant prosecutor remembered watching her dismantle a defense argument line by line without raising her voice. Another recalled how she insisted body camera footage be preserved in a misconduct case that nearly disappeared. The officer did not see any of that. He saw a challenge. Every prior complaint he had survived told him this moment would pass too if he stayed firm. Every time he had been supported taught him not to retreat. What he did not realize was that this time, the paper trail would not protect him. Two lives shaped by entirely different lessons collided in a narrow hallway because of a single assumption. One believed the law existed to restrain power. The other believed power existed to enforce order, and neither of them was willing to step aside. The hallway came alive in small, almost invisible ways. Shoes slowed, conversation stopped mid-sentence. A door across the hall cracked open just enough for an eye to appear. The officer stood squared in the doorway, now blocking it with his body as if the room behind him needed containment. The woman reached into her bag and removed a slim leather folder. She opened it and held it out not toward his face, but at chest level, calm and visible. Inside was her federal identification. Her photograph, her title, her authority spelled out in plain language. United States District Attorney. The seal caught the overhead light. "This is my credential," she said. "This office is assigned to me. You can verify it with building security or your supervisor. I am not refusing to cooperate. I am asking you to follow procedure." He barely glanced at it. "Put that away," he said. "I don't need to see that. Step outside." The dismissal landed harder than the order. A murmur moved through the hallway. Someone whispered her name. Someone else whispered his badge number. A young clerk lifted her phone higher, framing the doorway. The red recording dot reflected faintly in the officer's eye. "Sir." One of the aides spoke carefully from a few steps back. "She works here. I've seen her in court." The officer turned his head just enough to acknowledge the interruption. "This is an active security matter. Please move along." No one moved. The woman set the folder back on her desk and folded her hands in front of her. Her voice stayed even. "You are escalating a situation without cause. I have shown identification. I have not threatened anyone. You are now interfering with federal business." That word "interfered" seemed to hit something. The officer's jaw tightened. His posture stiffened. "You are refusing a lawful order," he said. "That gives me grounds to remove you." Lawful based on what she asked. Her eyes never left his. "Tell me the statute. Tell me the policy." Behind him, the hallway was no longer pretending. Phones were fully raised now. A staff attorney whispered to another, "Call the chief." Someone else stepped closer just enough to catch clear audio. The building security guard hovered at the far end, unsure which authority outranked the other. The officer felt it. The crowd. The pressure. The subtle shift where control starts to slip. He had seen this before on traffic stops in convenience stores, in places where people asked too many questions. His training told him hesitation invited chaos. "I'm not debating this," he said louder now. "Last warning. Step out of the office." The woman did not move. Instead, she reached over and turned her office nameplate outward so it faced the hallway. Her name? Her title? clean brass, bolted into place. She stepped aside so there was no obstruction, no ambiguity. "This is my office," she said. "I am not leaving." The silence that followed was thick and unmistakable. It was no longer about misunderstanding. It was about choice. The officer took a breath, slow and visible. His hand brushed the radio at his shoulder. In that moment, every camera in the hallway leaned in closer, because everyone watching understood the same thing. If he pushed forward now, there would be no way to rewind what happened next. The officer's hand moved to his radio, then stopped. For a half-second, everything slowed. The hum of the lights, the distant elevator bell, the faint click of phone cameras adjusting focus. Time stretched in that narrow hallway as if everyone sensed they were crossing into a moment that could not be undone. "Ma'am, turn around," he said. "You're being escorted out for failing to comply with a security directive." Escorted turned into advanced. His foot stepped forward. His shoulder filled the doorway. The distance between them closed not with violence, but with certainty. The woman did not raise her hands. She did not shout. She simply inhaled deep and steady and turned slowly exactly as instructed. Metal cuffs came out. The sound was unmistakable. A sharp mechanical click that cut through the air and landed in every chest watching. Slow motion. The cuffs opened. Her wrists came together behind her back. Cold steel touched skin. The pressure tightened. One click, then another. Someone gasped. Someone said no under their breath. A phone slipped from shaking fingers and clattered against the floor. The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in fear, but in recognition. This was the line. This was the record being written. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady forward. She said nothing as the cuffs locked. "You don't have to do this," a voice said from the crowd. "She's federal. Check her ID." The officer did not respond. He guided her forward with a hand at her elbow. Not rough, not gentle, procedural. Each step echoed. Her heels tapped against the marble floor as she was led out of her own office. The nameplate remained on the desk behind her facing the door, proof left unattended. They moved past stunned staff, past walls lined with framed indictments and case victories bearing her signature. The irony hung heavy unspoken. She had authorized arrests for a living, but only after evidence process review. Now she was being removed without any of it. In the elevator, no one spoke. The doors slid shut with a soft final sound. The reflection in the mirrored wall showed her standing straight, hands restrained, expression unreadable. The officer stared forward, jaw tight, eyes fixed above the numbers lighting up one by one. Down in the security office, the silence continued. The room smelled faintly of toner and old carpet. A desk, a chair, a wall monitor playing muted footage from other parts of the building. She was positioned in front of it, still cuffed. "This is temporary," he said. "We'll sort it out." She finally spoke. Every word was measured. "You have detained a United States District Attorney without cause. You have interfered with federal operations. Everything from this moment forward is evidence." The officer looked away. For the first time, uncertainty crept in. Not panic, not remorse, just the thin edge of doubt. He keyed his radio and requested a supervisor. His voice was controlled but lower now. As the minutes passed, the weight of the room changed. The crowd upstairs had not dispersed. The videos were already moving. And the injustice was no longer confined to a hallway. It was documented. The supervisor arrived without urgency at first. A man in a pressed uniform, keys clipped to his belt, coffee still warm in his hand. He glanced at the report on the desk, then at the woman seated in front of the monitor, wrists cuffed, posture straight. His eyes lingered for half a second longer than expected. "What's the situation?" he asked. "Unauthorized access," the officer said. She refused to comply with orders to leave a restricted office. The supervisor nodded once and turned to her. "Ma'am, can you state your name for the record?" She did not hesitate. She spoke clearly, evenly. "Full name, title, United States District Attorney. Assigned to this building for 7 years." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The supervisor paused. He reached for the clipboard, then stopped. He looked up again, more carefully this time. The room shifted. Not dramatically, subtly, like air pressure changing before a storm. He stepped closer and finally noticed what had been ignored upstairs. The cut of her suit, the way she carried silence. The calm familiarity of someone accustomed to rooms where decisions carry weight. "Do you have identification?" he asked. She nodded toward the desk behind him. It was still open. Her leather folder lay exactly where she had placed it. Untouched. Unexamined, the supervisor opened it. The seal was unmistakable. He read once, then again. His jaw tightened. He flipped the card over, checked the hologram, the expiration date, the issuing authority. He did not need to verify it. He already knew. He looked at the officer. "You said you verified this." The officer shifted. "I didn't believe it was authentic." The supervisor closed the folder slowly. The sound was quiet but final. He stepped back and exhaled. The room no longer belonged to the officer. It hadn't for several minutes. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, lowering his voice. "I'm going to remove the restraints." The cuffs came off. Another metallic click. This one different. Reversal instead of escalation. Red marks bloomed on her wrists where the steel had pressed. She flexed her fingers once. That was all. Upstairs, the building administrator had arrived, then legal counsel, then another supervisor. The hallway was now crowded with people who understood the gravity of what had happened. Phones were no longer hidden. No one asked them to be put away. The supervisor turned back to the officer. "You detained a sitting United States District Attorney in her own office," he said. "Without verification. Without cause. In front of witnesses." The officer's mouth opened. Closed. He looked around, searching for something that would restore order. There was nothing left to grab onto. "I was following protocol," he said quietly. The supervisor shook his head. "No, you followed assumption." Silence settled again, heavier this time. The kind that comes after truth is spoken aloud. Someone from federal security cleared their throat. Legal counsel requested body camera footage. Another staffer requested incident reports. Timestamps, radio logs, names. The woman stood. "I will need copies of everything she said, immediately. Body camera footage, internal communications, security reports, witness statements. This matter involves federal interference." The supervisor nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes returned to the officer for the first time since the cuffs were removed. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with clarity. "You had multiple opportunities to stop," she said. "You chose not to." That was the moment his face changed. Not fear, recognition. He understood now that this was not a misunderstanding to be smoothed over. It was a record, permanent, reviewed by people who spoke in findings, not excuses. As she walked back toward the elevator, staff parted without instruction. The hallway was silent again, but no longer confused. The cameras kept recording, because everyone knew. The truth had arrived. The consequences did not wait for morning. By the time she reached her office again, escorted this time by federal security emails were already stacking up. Screenshots. Video clips. Messages that began with, "Did this really just happen?" Someone in the hallway had uploaded the footage before the elevator reached the ground floor. By noon, it was everywhere. The video did not need commentary. It showed a woman calmly presenting credentials. It showed an officer refusing to look. It showed cuffs. It showed silence. Within hours, millions had watched it unfold frame by frame, pausing on the moment the metal closed around her wrists. That afternoon, a formal complaint was filed. Not emotional, precise. Time-stamped, cited. It named the officer, his supervisor, and the department. It alleged unlawful detention interference with federal operations, violation of civil rights, and abuse of authority under color of law. Each claim matched to footage. Each allegation backed by witness statements already collected. The department placed the officer on administrative leave before the end of the day. His badge was surrendered, his weapon logged. The internal investigation began immediately, but it no longer controlled the narrative. Federal oversight stepped in within 48 hours. Media coverage intensified. Not because she was a victim, but because she was undeniable. Headline after headline repeated the same phrase, ordered out of her own office, a U.S. district attorney. The comment sections filled with stories that sounded painfully similar, except without credentials, without cameras, without outcomes. The officer's history was reviewed. Complaints resurfaced. Patterns emerged. Incidents previously labeled inconclusive now looked different under new light. Body camera footage from unrelated stops showed the same posture, the same tone, the same refusal to de-escalate when questioned. The investigation expanded. Supervisors were interviewed. Training records examined? Why had no one intervened earlier? Why vague reports were accepted as justification? Why verification procedures were ignored? The answers were thin: custom, discretion, trust in judgment. None of it held up under scrutiny. 3 weeks later, the findings were released. The officer had violated departmental policy. He had ignored verification protocols. He had escalated without cause. His actions were ruled unlawful. Termination followed. Not negotiated, not delayed, immediate. But the story did not end with one career. A civil suit was filed against the city. The settlement came quietly, months later the number undisclosed, but described by insiders as substantial. Mandatory retraining was ordered. Building security procedures were rewritten. Verification protocols were made non-optional. Federal coordination became policy, not courtesy. She returned to work without press conferences, without statements. The cases on her desk did not pause because of what happened, but the system around her shifted. Subtly, permanently. The officer's name disappeared from the roster. His appeal was denied. His record followed him. Other departments declined to hire. Authority once assumed was now questioned everywhere he went, and the videos remained online, not as spectacle, as evidence, because justice, when it finally arrived, did not raise its voice. It documented. It corrected. And it made sure this would not be forgotten. What happened in that hallway was not a misunderstanding. It was a violation. Under federal law, a detention requires articulable facts that point to unlawful behavior. Not discomfort, not assumptions, not vague reports stripped of detail. Ordering someone to leave a space they are lawfully entitled to occupy without verification crosses into unlawful seizure. Applying restraints without probable cause escalates that violation into a constitutional breach. Interfering with a federal official performing official duties carries additional weight. Federal operations are protected precisely because disruption undermines public trust and institutional function. In this case, the failure was not only individual, it was procedural. Verification protocols exist to prevent exactly this outcome. Ignoring them removes the shield of good faith. Psychologically, the incident follows a familiar pattern. Bias does not announce itself loudly. It narrows perception. Once an assumption forms contrary evidence is treated as deception rather than correction. Credentials become suspicious. Calm becomes defiance. Questions become threats. Authority reacts not to facts, but to the challenge of being questioned. This is why training alone is insufficient. Systems must slow escalation, require verification, create mandatory pauses where authority is checked by process. When discretion is unlimited, bias fills the gap. For viewers, the lesson is practical. If you are confronted by law enforcement in a place you are legally entitled to be, remain calm. Ask for the legal basis of the order. Do not physically resist. Document if lawful to do so. State your name and role clearly. Request a supervisor. Preserve evidence immediately afterward. Time stamps matter. Witness names matter. Silence when recorded matters. For institutions, the responsibility is greater. Authority must be accountable before harm occurs, not after a video goes viral. Early complaints are warnings, not inconveniences. Verification is not optional. It is protection for everyone involved. The most important lesson is this: the woman in that office was protected by knowledge, position, and cameras. Many are not. The law only works when it is applied consistently regardless of who is standing in front of the badge. So the question is not whether this should have happened. It is why it still does. And what will change before the next door opens and the next order is given?